August 14, 1989. Keginet is a Siberian outpost so isolated it barely registers on most maps. Just a handful of houses surrounded by pitch-black forest. At 1:40 a.m., a 70-car freight train rolls through that timberline. The drivers spot something ahead and slam the emergency brakes. But 70 cars of heavy cargo can't stop on a dime, and beneath the steel wheels they hear the sickening sound of something being crushed. When the drivers step down into the freezing night with their lanterns, they find the dismembered remains of 7 15-year-old boys scattered across the rails. Local police closed the case as a tragic accident, but the physical details left behind pointed to a more complex and disturbing sequence of events. The local authorities wrapped up the investigation almost immediately. Their official narrative was that the boys had gathered pine cones, missed their train, and fell asleep on the active tracks. But the schematic of the crime scene suggested otherwise. Investigators found all 7 of the boys' backpacks lined up in a neat row, a full 250 meters away from where their bodies lay. Toxicology reports showed 0 alcohol in the boys' blood, and the train drivers were adamant. As the massive locomotive approached, none of the boys moved or flinched. The grieving families were certain their sons were murdered, but they faced a local police force that had already decided the truth was too inconvenient to pursue. By 1991, the families realized they had no hope in Keginet. As the Soviet Union began to fracture, they bypassed local officials and wrote directly to President Boris Yeltsin to demand a federal investigation. Moscow responded by sending 2 elite investigators to the village, who immediately ordered the exhumation of all 7 boys. The subsequent autopsies revealed trauma that a train could not have caused: shattered jaws, fractured skulls, and severe defensive wounds across their torsos. These injuries were all inflicted before the boys were hit by the train. Forensic experts matched the specific shapes of these blunt force injuries to heavy steel tools found exclusively in railway depots, such as massive wrenches and iron crowbars. The forensic evidence proved that the official narrative was a lie, carefully constructed to hide a violent assault. Under the weight of a federal investigation, a local lineman finally broke down and confessed to the events of that night. The ringleader was Nikolai, a senior police lieutenant. He had been drinking with a group of local men near the station when he escalated a petty argument with the teenagers into a massacre. Nikolai was tall and he was armed. When the boys tried to flee the beating, the lieutenant drew his service weapon and threatened to shoot. He used his authority to trap the 7 teenagers while his accomplices beat them to death. After the murders, Nikolai ordered his men to drag the bodies onto the tracks so the next freight train would destroy the evidence. They then placed the backpacks in a row to simulate a campsite. Nikolai utilized his tactical training to stage the scene, ensuring the subsequent investigation would follow the accident narrative he had manufactured. By 1995, Nikolai and his accomplices were caught, tried, and sentenced to death. But the case hit a massive geopolitical hurdle in 1996. Russia was attempting to join the Council of Europe, a move that required the country to immediately suspend the death penalty. The Supreme Court reviewed the Keginet case to commute the death sentences, but a combination of massive procedural delays and legal loopholes resulted in the killers being released entirely. Once freed, the men returned to a life of violence. One accomplice was found suffocated, and another was found dead on the same railway line. Meanwhile, Nikolai leveraged his local standing to become a municipal politician. This mass release was the result of a terrifyingly apathetic, bureaucratic collapse at the highest levels of the Russian justice system. By 1999, Russia was struggling with economic crises and political shifts. Society was ready to move on, and the Keginet murders began to fade from public consciousness. The victims' families refused to yield. They fought through years of institutional resistance until they successfully forced the prosecutor general to reopen the case. For 4 years, the families fought through red tape, tracked down lost evidence files, and exhumed the bodies for a 3rd time. In a system where the official mechanisms of justice had failed, these citizens became the only force capable of holding the state accountable. In 2003, 14 years after the murders, the Supreme Court finally reconvicted Nikolai and his accomplices.
Despite the brutality of the crime, the sentencing was lenient. Nikolai and his primary accomplice received 10 years in prison, while another received only 7. Throughout the trial, Nikolai claimed he was a victim of the system, arguing he had been framed by the same legal processes he once used to cover up a massacre. The legacy of Keginet serves as a warning of how easily bureaucracy can be manipulated to erase atrocities. It proves that the only force capable of breaking a corrupt system is the agonizing persistence of those who refuse to let the truth be forgotten.